This elephant gave birth and fainted for hours. People were shocked when they saw its calf. In the heart of a lush African savanna, the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary buzzed with anticipation. Jimena, the majestic matriarch of the elephant herd, was in labor. The air was thick with tension as the sanctuary staff and the elephant family gathered around her. Dr. Sarah Thompson, the lead veterinarian, wiped sweat from her brow as she monitored Jimena's vital signs. "Something's not right," she muttered to her assistant James. "Her blood pressure is dropping rapidly." The elephants trumpeted nervously, sensing the distress of their beloved leader. Itzel, Jimena's eldest daughter, paced restlessly at the edge of the group, her eyes darting between her mother and the gathering storm clouds on the horizon. With a final mighty push, Jimena gave birth to twins, a rare occurrence in elephants. The first calf, a male, emerged strong and healthy, but with an unusual feature: intricate, shimmering patterns across his grey skin. The second calf, a female, was alarmingly small and struggled to breathe. Dr. Thompson rushed to attend to the newborns, her heart racing. "The male seems healthy, but those markings, I've never seen anything like it," she said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. "The female is having trouble. We need to act fast." As the team worked frantically to stabilize the female calf, Jimena let out a deep, mournful bellow and collapsed to the ground. The herd erupted in panic, their trumpets echoing across the savanna. Itzel, who had been watching from afar, suddenly moved closer, her eyes fixed on her fallen mother and newborn siblings. For a moment, it seemed as though she might charge at the humans, but instead, she stood still, her gaze intense and unreadable. Dr. Thompson looked up at the darkening sky, feeling the first drops of rain on her skin. "We need to move them to shelter now," she shouted over the rising wind. "James, call for backup. We're going to need all hands on deck for this." As the storm began to rage and the sanctuary staff scrambled to protect the elephants, no one noticed the faint glow emanating from the male calf's unusual markings. The stage was set for a tale of family, mystery, and the unbreakable bonds of nature, a story that would change the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary forever. Days passed, and the atmosphere at the sanctuary remained tense. Jimena, though slowly recovering, was still too weak to care for her newborns properly. The staff had named the twins Tonatiuh and Ixchel, inspired by ancient Aztec deities of the sun and moon. Tonatiuh, the male calf with the mysterious markings, grew stronger by the day. His skin continued to shimmer with an otherworldly glow, particularly under direct sunlight. Ixchel, on the other hand, struggled to keep up with her brother. Her small frame and fragile health kept the veterinary team constantly on edge. Itzel, the eldest daughter, had become an enigma to both the elephants and the humans. She alternated between long periods of isolation and moments of intense focus on the twins. The herd, unsure of how to react to her unpredictable behavior, kept their distance. Dr. Thompson sat in her office, poring over books and research papers. "There has to be an explanation for Tonatiuh's markings," she muttered to herself. Her assistant, James, entered with a fresh pot of coffee. "Any luck?" he asked, pouring her a cup. Sarah shook her head. "Nothing. It's as if these markings appeared out of nowhere. And the way they react to light, it's unlike anything I've ever seen in nature." Meanwhile, out in the sanctuary, Itzel approached the twins for the first time since their birth. The other elephants watched warily, ready to intervene if necessary. To everyone's surprise, Itzel gently caressed Ixchel with her trunk, as if sensing the young calf's vulnerability. Tonatiuh, curious about his older sister, moved closer. As he did, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, causing his markings to glow brightly. Itzel stepped back, startled by the phenomenon. Dr. Thompson, who had been observing from a distance, quickly jotted down notes. "Fascinating," she whispered. "It's almost as if Tonatiuh's markings are reacting to Itzel's presence." As the days turned into weeks, a pattern emerged. Itzel, once distant and aggressive, began to show a protective side towards Ixchel. She would often stand guard while the fragile calf slept, or help her reach food and water. However, she remained cautious around Tonatiuh, as if unsure what to make of her unusual brother. Jimena, still weakened from the difficult birth, watched her children with a mixture of love and concern. She could sense the growing bond between Itzel and Ixchel, but also the divide that Tonatiuh's condition was creating within the family. One evening, as the sun set over the savannah, Dr. Thompson received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a world-renowned expert in elephant behavior and communication, arrived at the sanctuary unannounced. "I came as soon as I heard about the twins," Elena said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. A colleague mentioned the unusual markings on the male calf. This could be a groundbreaking discovery in elephant genetics. Sarah nodded, both relieved and apprehensive about having another expert on site. "That we could certainly use your expertise, Elena. But there's more to this situation than just the markings. The family dynamics here are complex." As they walked towards the elephant enclosure, Elena asked, "Complex how?" Sarah sighed, watching Itzel gently guiding Ixchel to a waterhole while Tonatiuh trailed behind. "It's as if these markings are more than just a physical trait. They're affecting the entire family structure. And I can't help but feel we're on the brink of uncovering something extraordinary." Little did they know, the arrival of Dr. Rodriguez would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge their scientific understanding, but also test the very bonds of the elephant family they sought to protect. As weeks turned into months, the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary became a hub of scientific activity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's presence had attracted attention from researchers and conservationists worldwide, all eager to study the mysterious case of Tonatiuh and his glowing markings. Amidst the flurry of human activity, the elephant family continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Jimena had regained much of her strength, once again assuming her role as the herd's matriarch. However, the dynamics within her immediate family remained strained. Itzel's protectiveness towards Ixchel had grown into a deep, almost maternal bond. The once aggressive elephant now spent her days teaching her fragile sister the ways of the herd, showing a gentleness that amazed the sanctuary staff. Tonatiuh, despite his apparent health and unique beauty, often found himself on the outskirts of this newfound sisterly connection. His markings, which pulsed with an ethereal light under the African sun, seemed to make the other elephants uneasy. One particularly hot afternoon, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Rodriguez were observing the family from a hidden blind. They watched as Tonatiuh approached a watering hole where Itzel and Ixchel were cooling off. "Look at how Itzel positions herself," Elena whispered, pointing. "She's placing her body between Tonatiuh and Ixchel. It's as if she's protecting Ixchel from him." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. "But why? Tonatiuh has never shown any signs of aggression. If anything, he seems desperate for connection." As if on cue, Tonatiuh let out a soft, mournful rumble. He took another step towards his sisters, his markings beginning to glow more intensely in the bright sunlight. Suddenly, Ixchel, who had been partially hidden behind Itzel, emerged into full view. To everyone's astonishment, she walked directly towards Tonatiuh, her usual timidity replaced by an almost trance-like determination. "What on earth?" Sarah gasped, reaching for her binoculars. As Ixchel approached Tonatiuh, his markings pulsed with an intensity they had never witnessed before. The air seemed to shimmer around the two young elephants as they touched trunks. In that moment, a low, deep rumble emanated from both calves, a sound that reverberated through the ground and sent shivers down the spines of all who heard it. Itzel seemingly snapped out of her protective stance, took a step back, her eyes wide with what looked like a mixture of fear and awe. "Did you feel that?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "It was like the earth itself was speaking," Sarah finished, her scientific mind racing to make sense of what they had just witnessed. As quickly as it had begun, the moment passed. Ixchel blinked, looking almost surprised to find herself face to face with Tonatiuh. She retreated to Itzel's side, leaving Tonatiuh standing alone, his markings slowly fading back to their usual faint shimmer. Back at the research center, Sarah and Elena pored over the video footage they had captured. "This goes beyond anything we've ever seen in elephant behavior," Elena said, her eyes glued to the screen. The way Tonatio's markings reacted, the sound they produced, it's almost as if they were communicating on a level we can't comprehend. Sarah nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. But communicate what? And why does it only happen with Ixchel? Itzel seems almost afraid of it. As they debated late into the night, neither scientist noticed the figure watching them from the shadows outside. James Tyers, Dr. Thompson's assistant, slipped away silently, pulling out a satellite phone as soon as he was out of earshot. "Sir," he spoke quietly into the device, "you were right. There's definitely something special about these elephants, something that goes beyond science as we know it." The voice on the other end was cold and calculating. "Excellent. Continue monitoring the situation. We'll make our move soon. Remember, James, discretion is key. No one can know about our interest in these animals." As James hung up, a cool breeze swept across the savannah, carrying with it the promise of change and the threat of dangers yet unseen. The Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary, once a peaceful haven, was quickly becoming the center of a mystery that would challenge the boundaries between science, nature, and the unknown. As the African night enveloped the sanctuary, a sense of unease settled over the land. The elephants, typically calm under the blanket of stars, seemed restless. Haimna paced the perimeter of their enclosure, her eyes scanning the darkness as if sensing an unseen threat. Inside the research center, Dr. Thompson and Dr. Rodriguez were engrossed in their analysis of the day's extraordinary events. Cups of coffee grew cold as they pored over data, watched and re-watched video footage, and debated theories that stretched the limits of their scientific understanding. "Elena," Sarah said, rubbing her tired eyes, "what if Tonatio's markings are more than just a genetic anomaly? What if they're a key of some sort?" Elena looked up from her notebook, intrigued. "A key to what?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But the way they react to Ixchel, the sound they produced, it's as if they're trying to unlock something." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. James entered, carrying a tray of fresh coffee. "Thought you two could use a refill," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he set down the tray, his gaze lingered on the screens displaying Tonatio's glowing markings. Sarah, noticing his interest, felt a flicker of suspicion. "Everything okay, James?" he startled slightly. "Oh yes, Dr. Thompson. Just fascinated by all this, like everyone else." He hurried out of the room, leaving Sarah with an uneasy feeling. Outside, in the elephant enclosure, Itzel had positioned herself protectively near Ixchel, who slept peacefully for the first time in days. Tonatio stood a short distance away, his markings emitting a faint, pulsing glow in the moonlight. Suddenly, a low, distant rumble caused the ground to tremble slightly. Jimena's head shot up, her ears flapping as she tried to locate the source of the disturbance. The other elephants began to stir, a nervous energy spreading through the herd. In the research center, Sarah and Elena felt the tremor. They rushed to the window, scanning the horizon. "Earthquake?" Elena wondered aloud. Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. Look." She pointed towards the elephant enclosure, where Tonatio's markings had begun to glow with an intensity that illuminated the entire area. The young elephant raised his trunk and let out a trumpet that seemed to shake the very air around them. In response, Ixchel awoke and moved towards her brother, ignoring Itzel's attempts to hold her back. As the two calves touched trunks, the glowing patterns on Tonatio's skin began to shift and swirl, forming shapes that looked almost like writing. "Oh my God," Elena breathed. "Sarah, are you seeing this?" But before Sarah could respond, the light show abruptly ended, plunging the sanctuary back into darkness. The two scientists stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Miles away, in a luxurious office overlooking a bustling city, a man put down his phone with a satisfied smile. "Excellent work, James," he murmured to himself. "Soon, the power of those elephants will be ours to control." As dawn broke over the sanctuary, the staff gathered for an emergency meeting. Sarah and Eleanor recounted what they had seen. Their words met with a mixture of awe and skepticism. Whatever's happening here, Sarah concluded, it's clear that Tonatiuh and Ixchel are at the center of it. We need to increase security and limit access to the elephant enclosure. Until we understand what's going on, we can't risk word of this getting out. Little did she know, it was already too late. As the meeting dispersed, James slipped away to make another covert phone call, setting in motion events that would soon threaten not just the elephants, but the entire sanctuary. Meanwhile, in the elephant enclosure, Ximena watched her children with growing concern. Itzel had become even more protective of Ixchel, barely letting the younger calf out of her sight. Tonatiuh, his markings now dormant, stood alone at the edge of the group, his eyes filled with a wisdom and sadness that seemed far beyond his years. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the savannah, the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary stood on the brink of a discovery that would challenge the very foundations of science and nature. But with discovery comes danger, and the shadows concealed threats both human and otherworldly, all converging on this small corner of Africa, where elephants held secrets as old as the earth itself. As news of the mysterious events at Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary began to spread through scientific circles, it was inevitable that it would attract attention from beyond the world of conservation and research. Dr. Alexandra Costas, a brilliant but controversial anthropologist known for her unconventional theories about ancient civilizations and their connection to animals, arrived unannounced at the sanctuary's gates. "I'm sorry, Dr. Costas, but we're not accepting any more researchers at the moment," Sarah explained, trying to keep her tone polite but firm. "The situation here is delicate." Alexandra's piercing green eyes locked onto Sarah's. "Dr. Thompson, I'm not here as just another researcher. I believe I can help you understand what's happening with your elephants, particularly with Tonatiuh's markings." Eleanor, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "And how exactly do you think you can help, Dr. Costas? This is a matter of elephant biology and behavior, not anthropology." A knowing smile played on Alexandra's lips. "Is it? Or is it something much older, something that bridges the gap between human history and the natural world?" Despite their reservations, Sarah and Elena exchanged glances. They both knew they were out of their depth with the recent developments. Reluctantly, Sarah nodded. "All right, Dr. Costas, you can stay, but you follow our rules. Understood?" As Alexandra settled into the sanctuary, her presence caused a stir among both the human staff and the elephant herd. She spent hours observing Tonatiuh from a distance, sketching his markings in a worn leather notebook and muttering to herself in a language Sarah didn't recognize. One afternoon, as the heat of the day began to wane, Alexandra approached Sarah and Elena with excitement in her eyes. "I've seen these patterns before," she declared, opening her notebook to reveal intricate drawings that mirrored Tonatiuh's markings. "That's impossible," Elena scoffed. "These markings are unique to Tonatiuh." Alexandra shook her head. "Not unique. Ancient. I've found similar symbols in cave paintings dating back thousands of years, in locations all over Africa. They always appear alongside depictions of elephants, but until now, I thought they were merely decorative." Sarah leaned in, her scientific skepticism warring with undeniable curiosity. "What are you suggesting, Dr. Costas?" "I believe Tonatiuh is a living link to an ancient form of communication," Alexandra explained, her voice hushed with awe. "A language that once allowed humans and elephants to share knowledge and wisdom." Before either Sarah or Elena could respond, a commotion from the elephant enclosure caught their attention. They rushed to see what was happening. Alexandra close behind. Tonatiuh stood at the center of the herd, his markings glowing more brightly than ever before. Ixchel was approaching him, her usual timidity replaced by a sense of purpose. Itzel, torn between her protective instincts and an inexplicable pull towards her siblings, watched with visible anxiety. As Ixchel reached Tonatiuh, their trunks intertwined. The air around them seemed to shimmer and distort, and a low, resonant hum filled the air. The other elephants, including Ximena, formed a circle around the twins, swaying in unison as if participating in an ancient ritual. Alexandra gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's happening," she whispered. "They're accessing the old knowledge." Suddenly, Itzel let out a trumpet of distress and charged towards her siblings. The moment she made contact with them, a blinding flash of light erupted from Tonatiuh's markings, engulfing all three young elephants. When the light faded, Sarah, Elena, and Alexandra stood in stunned silence. Tonatiuh, Ixchel, and Itzel lay unconscious on the ground, their bodies intertwined. But the most shocking change was in Itzel. Intricate, glowing patterns, similar to Tonatiuh's but uniquely her own, now adorned her grey skin. As the sanctuary staff rushed to check on the elephants, James slipped away unnoticed. In the shadows, he made another furtive phone call. "Sir, there's been a development, a big one. I think it's time to move forward with the plan." The voice on the other end was cold and calculating. "Excellent. Prepare for extraction. We'll be there within 24 hours. As James ended the call, a chill ran down his spine. He glanced back at the elephant enclosure, where Sarah, Elena, and Alexandra were frantically working to revive the young elephants. For a moment, he hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But then he steeled himself, remembering the promises of wealth and power that awaited him if he saw this through. Little did anyone know, the events unfolding at Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary were about to attract attention from forces far beyond the realm of science or conservation. As night fell over the savannah, the stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge the bonds of family, the limits of science, and the very nature of the connection between humans and animals. Dawn broke over the sanctuary, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. But the usual peace of the early morning was shattered by a flurry of activity around the elephant enclosure. Tonatiuh, Ixchel, and Itzel had remained unconscious through the night, their bodies still entwined, the mysterious markings on Tonatiuh and Itzel pulsing with a faint, rhythmic glow. Dr. Thompson and Dr. Rodriguez had worked tirelessly through the night, monitoring the elephants' vital signs and debating their next steps. Dr. Costas sat nearby, her eyes never leaving the young elephants, her notebook open on her lap as she furiously scribbled observations and theories. "Their brain activity is off the charts," Sarah muttered, studying a portable EEG machine they had rigged up. "It's as if they're communicating, or processing massive amounts of information." Eleanor nodded, her face etched with concern. "But how is this possible? And what triggered Itzel's transformation?" Alexandra looked up from her notebook. "I believe Itzel's intervention connected her to whatever ancient knowledge Tonatiuh and Ixchel were accessing. The markings are a physical manifestation of this connection." Before either scientist could respond, a low rumble emanated from the three young elephants. Their eyes fluttered open simultaneously, and they slowly disentangled themselves, standing on shaky legs. Jimena approached cautiously, reaching out with her trunk to touch each of her children in turn. As she made contact with Tonatiuh and Itzel, their markings flared brightly for a moment, causing the matriarch to step back in surprise. "Look!" Elena gasped, pointing at Ixchel. The once frail calf stood tall and strong, her body having undergone a remarkable transformation overnight. While she didn't bear the glowing markings of her siblings, there was a new vitality and presence about her that was undeniable. As the sanctuary staff watched in awe, Tonatiuh, Ixchel, and Itzel began to move in perfect unison, their trunks intertwining as they formed a tight circle. A low, melodic humming filled the air, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble slightly. "It's similar to what we observed before," Sarah said, her voice hushed with wonder. "But this feels different, more purposeful." Alexandra nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "They're not just communicating, they're awakening something." As if in response to her words, the humming grew louder, and the glow from Tonatiuh and Itzel's markings intensified. Shapes began to form in the air around them, ghostly images of elephants from ages past, each bearing similar markings to Tonatiuh's. The other elephants in the herd gathered around, forming concentric circles around the three young ones at the center. Even Jimena joined in, taking her place in the formation as if guided by some ancient instinct. "My God," Elena breathed. "It's like they're tapping into the collective memory of their entire species." As the scientists watched, transfixed. James appeared at Sarah's side, his face pale and drawn. "Dr. Thompson," he said urgently, "we have a problem. There's a group of armed men at the sanctuary gates. They're demanding access to the elephants." Sarah tore her gaze away from the extraordinary scene before her, her mind racing. "Armed men? Who are they?" James shook his head, avoiding eye contact. "I don't know, but they seem dangerous. They're threatening to use force if we don't comply." As if sensing the approaching threat, the elephants' humming grew louder and the ghostly images around them became more defined. Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel raised their trunks in unison, letting out a trumpet that shook the very air around them. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. "Elena, Alexandra, stay here with the elephants. Try to understand what's happening. James, come with me. We need to stall those men and protect the herd at all costs." As Sarah and James hurried towards the sanctuary gates, the air crackled with tension. The events set in motion by Tonatiuh's birth were racing towards a climax that would challenge the boundaries between past and present, human and animal, science and myth. In the elephant enclosure, Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel continued their mysterious communion, oblivious to the danger approaching. The fate of the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary, and perhaps much more, now hung in the balance, as ancient powers and modern threats converged on this small corner of the African savanna. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Sarah and James approached the sanctuary gates. A group of heavily armed men in black tactical gear stood on the other side, their faces hidden behind dark visors. At their head stood a tall, imposing figure in an expensive suit, a stark contrast to his militaristic companions. "Dr. Thompson," the man in the suit called out, his voice smooth and controlled. "I'm Mr. Blackwood, representing a private research organization. We're here to discuss the transfer of your unique elephants." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but I don't know what you're talking about. Our elephants aren't for sale or transfer." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I think you misunderstand, Doctor. This isn't a request. We have the authority and means to take what we came for. The only question is whether you'll cooperate or not." As Sarah opened her mouth to respond, a deafening trumpet echoed across the sanctuary. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and a blinding light erupted from the direction of the elephant enclosure. Blackwood's composure faltered for a moment. "What was that?" he demanded. Before Sarah could answer, James stepped forward. "Sir, I think you should know." His words were cut short as the sky suddenly darkened, clouds swirling ominously overhead. A bolt of lightning struck the ground between the sanctuary gates and Blackwood's group, leaving a scorched pattern that looked eerily similar to the markings on Tonatiuh and Itzel. In the elephant enclosure, Elena and Alexandra watched in awe as Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel stood at the center of a swirling vortex of light and energy. The ghostly images of ancient elephants had solidified, forming a protective circle around the herd. "It's incredible," Alexandra breathed. "They're not just accessing the old knowledge, they're manifesting it." Eleanor nodded, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was seeing. "But how? And why now?" As if in answer, Jimena stepped forward, placing herself between her children and the direction of the sanctuary gates. She let out a low, reverberating rumble that seemed to speak directly to the souls of everyone present. At the gates, Sarah and James stumbled back as the ground continued to shake. Blackwood's men looked around nervously, their weapons seeming suddenly inadequate in the face of whatever power was awakening. "This is your final warning," Sarah called out, finding strength in the extraordinary events unfolding around her. "Leave now or face the consequences." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "You fool. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Those elephants hold the key to power beyond your wildest imagination." As he spoke, the swirling energy around Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel intensified. A beam of light shot into the sky, parting the storm clouds and revealing a tapestry of stars despite the daylight hour. James Gann, his earlier reservations forgotten, turned to Blackwood. "She's right. You need to leave. Now." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he looked at James. You were supposed to be our inside man. You betrayed us." Before James could respond, another earthquake-like tremor shook the sanctuary. The gates burst open of their own accord, and a stampede of ghostly elephants charged towards Blackwood and his men. In a panic, the armed group scattered, running for their vehicles. Blackwood stood his ground for a moment longer, his face a mask of fury and frustration. "This isn't over," he snarled, before finally turning and fleeing. As suddenly as it had begun, the supernatural display ceased. The sky cleared, the ground stilled, and the ghostly elephants vanished. In the enclosure, Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel collapsed to the ground, exhausted but unharmed. Sarah rushed back to the elephants, her heart pounding. "Are they okay?" she called out to Elena and Alexandra. Elena nodded, her face a mixture of relief and bewilderment. "They're fine, just sleeping. But Sarah, what we just witnessed, it changes everything." Alexandra smiled, her eyes shining with the excitement of discovery. "No, Dr. Rodriguez, it doesn't change everything. It reveals everything. The connection between elephants and humans, the ancient wisdom we thought was lost. It's all been here, waiting to be rediscovered." As the sanctuary staff tended to the elephants and secured the perimeter, Sarah found herself standing next to James. "You were working for them," she said softly. It wasn't a question. James nodded, his face etched with shame. "I was, but seeing what these elephants can do, what they represent, I couldn't go through with it. I'm sorry, Dr. Thompson, for everything." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll deal with that later. For now, we need to focus on protecting the elephants and understanding what just happened." As the sun began to set on one of the most extraordinary days in the history of the Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary, the air was filled with a sense of both wonder and trepidation. The powers awakened in Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel had saved them from immediate danger, but they had also attracted the attention of forces that would stop at nothing to control them. The final chapter of this incredible journey was about to unfold, one that would test the bonds of family, both human and elephant, and challenge the very nature of the relationship between mankind and the animal kingdom. In the days following the confrontation at the sanctuary gates, an uneasy calm settled over Kilimanjaro Elephant Sanctuary. The elephants, led by Jimena, had formed a protective circle around Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel, who spent much of their time in deep, trance-like sleep. Dr. Thompson, Dr. Rodriguez, and Dr. Costas worked tirelessly, documenting every observation and theory about the extraordinary events they had witnessed. The sanctuary was now under constant guard, with local authorities alerted to the potential threat posed by Blackwood and his organization. As the sun rose on the fifth day, Sarah stood at the observation post, watching the elephant family with a mixture of awe and concern. Elena joined her, offering a steaming mug of coffee. "Any changes?" Elena asked, her voice hushed. Sarah shook her head. "Nothing yet. But look at how the herd is behaving. It's as if they're waiting for something." Before Elena could respond, a low rumble emanated from the elephant enclosure. Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel slowly rose to their feet, their eyes gleaming with an inner light that spoke of ancient wisdom. The three young elephants moved in perfect unison, approaching Jimena. As they reached their mother, each touched her with their trunk. A soft glow enveloped the matriarch, and for a brief moment, faint markings similar to Tonatiuh's and Itzel's appeared on her skin. "My God," Elena breathed. "Are they passing on their knowledge?" Alexandra, who had just arrived, nodded excitedly. "Not just passing it on, they're awakening it. The potential has always been there in all elephants. These three are just the key to unlocking it." As they watched, Jimena turned to the rest of the herd. One by one, she touched each elephant with her trunk. With each contact, the elephant's eyes would widen and they would sway as if processing some profound revelation. "It's spreading through the entire herd," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "First, but what exactly is it, her?" Alexandra's eyes sparkled with the thrill of discovery. The old knowledge, the wisdom that once allowed elephants and humans to communicate, to share in the stewardship of the earth. It's been dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. As the process continued, the air around the sanctuary seemed to thrum with energy. The plants appeared to grow more vibrant, and even the soil itself seemed richer, more alive. Suddenly, Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel turned towards the observation post. Their eyes locked onto Sarah, Eleanor, and Alexandra. Without hesitation, the three scientists made their way down to the enclosure, drawn by an irresistible pull. As they approached the young elephants, James appeared, slightly out of breath. "Dr. Thompson, we've just received word. Blackwood and his men have been apprehended by the authorities. They found evidence linking them to illegal wildlife trafficking and corporate espionage. They won't be a threat anymore." As Tonatiuh's trunk touched Sarah's forehead, a flood of images and sensations washed over her. She saw vast savannas teeming with life, ancient human settlements living in harmony with elephant herds, and the gradual separation of humans and animals as civilizations grew and changed. In that moment, she understood the depth of the connection between elephants and the earth itself. Elena and Alexandra had similar experiences as Itzel and Ixchel touched them. When the connection broke, all three women stood in stunned silence, tears streaming down their faces. Did you see?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Sarah nodded, unable to find words to describe the profound experience. Alexandra, however, smiled broadly. "Yeah, we've been given a gift," she said, "a chance to bridge the gap between humans and nature once again." As the scientists tried to process what had just happened, the entire elephant herd began to move. Led by Ximena, with Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel at her side, they walked to the edge of their enclosure. To everyone's amazement, the heavy gates swung open of their own accord. James rushed forward. "Dr. Thompson, should we stop them?" Sarah shook her head, a sense of calm certainty washing over her. "No, James. This is meant to happen. They're not leaving us, they're inviting us to join them." As if confirming her words, Ximena turned and gently beckoned with her trunk. Without hesitation, Sarah, Elena, and Alexandra fell into step beside the elephants. James and the rest of the sanctuary staff, drawn by the same inexplicable pull, joined the procession. Together, humans and elephants walked out into the wider savanna. As they moved, the land seemed to come alive around them. Plants grew more lush, long dry stream beds began to flow with crystal-clear water, and animals emerged from hiding to watch the extraordinary parade. Word spread quickly, and people from nearby villages began to gather, watching in awe as the elephants and humans moved as one. Some, feeling the call of ancient connections, joined the group. As the sun reached its zenith, the procession arrived at the base of a great baobab tree, ancient and gnarled. Tonatiuh, Itzel, and Ixchel moved to the front, their markings glowing brightly in the midday sun. In unison, they raised their trunks and let out a trumpet that seemed to shake the very air. The baobab tree began to glow, and in its bark, patterns similar to the elephant's, markings appeared. Sarah gasped as understanding flooded her mind. "It's a nexus," she said, her voice filled with awe. "A point of connection between the physical world and the ancient wisdom the elephants carry." As she spoke, more animals began to emerge from the savanna: lions, giraffes, zebras, and countless birds. They formed a great circle around the elephants and humans, and a sense of profound peace settled over the gathering. Ximena stepped forward, touching the glowing baobab with her trunk. As she did, her voice, not heard aloud, but felt in the minds of all present, rang out clear and strong. For too long, the world has been out of balance. Humans have forgotten their connection to the earth and its creatures. Today, we begin to rebuild those bridges. The wisdom of ages, carried in the blood of elephants and in the roots of ancient trees, is reawakening. It is time for all of Earth's children to come together once more. As Ximena's message resonated through the gathering, Sarah, Elena, and Alexandra found themselves stepping forward. They placed their hands on the baobab tree, and in that moment, they became conduits for the ancient knowledge, helping to translate and share it with the humans present. In the days and weeks that followed, news of the miraculous events at Kilimanjaro spread across the world. Scientists, spiritual leaders, and ordinary people flocked to the site, eager to learn and connect. The sanctuary, once a small refuge for elephants, became a center of learning and harmony between humans and nature. Tonatia, Itzil, and Ixchel grew into their roles as bridges between worlds. Their unique abilities helped humans and animals communicate in ways long thought impossible. Under their guidance, and with the wisdom of Himina and the other elephants, new conservation methods were developed, blending modern science with ancient knowledge. The threat posed by those who would exploit this power for personal gain didn't disappear overnight, but the united front of humans and animals, bound by their renewed connection to the earth, stood strong against such dangers. As for Sarah, Eleanor, and Alexandra, they dedicated their lives to understanding and sharing the wisdom of the elephants. They became teachers and ambassadors, helping to spread the message of interconnectedness and harmony across the globe. And so, on the plains of Africa, under the spreading branches of an ancient baobab tree, a new chapter in the history of life on Earth began. One where the bonds between all living things were remembered, honored, and strengthened for generations to come.